Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Paul Kirst. Welcome to our regular Saturday Spiral Dynamics Integral Live Zoom discussion. Josh is here. Today, we're going to, I'm going to do a presentation on the book written by Neil Howe, The Fourth Turning is Now, and I'm going to give a little bit of a spiral dynamics perspective on it. Just to let you all know kind of the way our format is. I'll do the presentation and there will be time afterwards for discussion. And generally the way we like to handle that is in some ways it's better if you hold your questions till the end. Otherwise, the presentation can get real long if I have to stop and answer questions in the middle. And then once we get into the question and answer and discussion period, our rule is raise your hand and we'll keep track of it. And try to keep your question or comments to 5 minutes. And we're able to kind of follow who's in line and who's first and who's last in line. One of the kind of the ways we deviate from that, if somebody has had a chance to talk a few times and a new person comes in, we'll oftentimes let them go to the front of the line. So before I launch into this, any questions? If not, well, again, good morning, good afternoon. I don't think we have any evening people here. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. So again, this presentation is going to be on the fourth turning is here through a spiral dynamics lens. And we're going to look at the last 6 100-year turning cycles, and we'll get into some explanation what some of this terminology is, and when we get into the actual presentation. We're going to look at 6 100-year turning cycles along basically at the 200,000-year unfolding of the spiral. In 1997, William Strauss and Neil Howe co-wrote a book and published the book, The Fourth Turning, An American Prophecy. And I didn't actually read the book at the time. I read it later. But at the time I did read numerous articles that were published about it. And I watched a number of several hours of videos that were done by Neil Howe, in which he did present the books in detail. And I did circle back later and actually read the book. But and even at that time, I had begun to wonder about how this book's depiction of history actually fit into my own understanding of history that is influenced by my understanding of spiral dynamics, because I've always looked at spiral dynamics not just as kind of a static entity, but a continuum, a spiral that has evolved over time. And it was interesting, like I said, here were 2 different things that depicted these cyclical ways of looking at history. And I wondered how even at that time, I wondered how it was going. So when Neil Howe published The Fourth Turning is Here in 2023, I bought it, I read it, and actually reading the book, the similarities and differences between the fourth turning perspective on human history and spiral dynamics perspective really started to pop out. So it's kind of like the second addressing of the material, kind of my thinking kind of clarified. It really did leave me wanting to more deeply explore the interweaving of these 2 different models of human development. And then with this presentation, I invite you all to explore those interconnections with me. And again, emphasizing this is my interpretation of it. with a little help. And I'm sure we'll have some time for a discussion to get you all's looks at it too. So just a quick rundown of what our agenda is going to be. I'll start out with a real brief overview of the book. And then I'm going to go into a brief explanation of the concept of a cyclical, or in other words, a 4-generation cycle. And this is really one of the core concepts that Mr. Howe gets into in the book, both books. I'm going to go and cover the key points covered in the fourth turning is here. I'm going to we'll look at the similarities and differences between the model of fourth turning and the model of spiral dynamics. And we're actually then at the end, with the help of the great God, ChatGPT, I'm going to take a look at, through a spiral dynamics lens, I'm going to look at roughly 6.5 Anglo-Saxon, Anglo-American saculums that are outlined in the book. So rather than just covering 1 or 2 saculums, it goes back roughly seven saculum periods, or roughly 700 years of Anglo-American history. And then there'll be time for questions and discussions afterwards. So a brief overview. This is just a real brief overview. In the book, Neil Howe it's really an extension of his earlier work, the fourth turning. The book explores the concepts of the historical cycles of a saculum, which are roughly periods of 80 to 100 years that repeat in predictable patterns. Again, emphasis on predictable patterns. And each of these saculum are divided into 4 turnings, each lasting roughly 20 years or a generation, and each characterized by different societal moods and events. So it's just kind of this repeating cycle that follows the same themes throughout each saculum and then continues to do so. And in the book, Howe posits that we are now currently in the midst of a fourth turning, a period characterized by upheaval and transformation, where old institutions crumble, making way for new structures to emerge. This era isn't just about chaos. It's a pivotal moment that can redefine our collective future if we recognize and harness its potential. He explores how each generation plays a crucial role in these cycles, highlighting the unique traits of the millennials, the Gen X's, the baby boomers, the silent generation. He delves into their interactions and values, how they contribute to societal shifts, and suggests that understanding these dynamics is key to navigating the challenges ahead, because we are, as he posits, in that fourth turning crisis cycle. By analyzing the patterns from past turnings, he does provide some insight into what we might expect in the coming years, emphasizing that history doesn't just repeat itself, it rhymes in a profound way. So again, it's not that the exact things happen over and over again, but there's a commonality to the themes. As they say, they rhyme. And again, I want to give an emphasis on the word very brief. This book has 460 pages of content, 50 plus pages of notes, and a 17-page bibliography. So it's a pretty hefty, substantial piece of work. So I want to get into what a saculum is, because this is really, he uses this term over and over again, and the whole structure of the book is centered around this concept of the saculum cycle. In the fourth turning, a saculum refers to a long-term cycle of history, roughly 80 to 100 years, that consists of 4 distinct phases or turnings. Each turning lasts about 20 to 25 years, or a single generation and represents different mood and outlook in society. So these are the four turnings of a seculum cycle. The first turning, which he calls the high, is a post-crisis era where institutions are strong and individualism is weak. Society feels unified with a collective sense of purpose. The second turning, or the awakening, as he calls it, is a period marked by spiritual upheaval where institutions are attacked in the name of personal freedom and self-expression. The third turning, or the unraveling, institutions weaken and individualism rises, societies become fragmented, and there's a sense of uncertainty that kind of descends on society in general. And the fourth turning, or the crisis, is a decisive era of secular upheaval where old order is destroyed and replaced with a new one. This phase often involves wars or major societal transformations. In each of these seculum, there's emerges a different social mood or a different approach to how the people in it, how the society views itself. And I'll take a little bit of time to go through this. And again, these moods, he looks at it from a social structure, what the worldview is at the time, what the social priority is, what the sense of what is the greatest need that's expressed at that time, what is the vision that engenders, and then he gets into this idea of either the supply and the demand of what he calls social order. In other words, social cohesiveness, and then of course the demand, because there's always a disparity or a difference between the actual supply and the demand. And again, I'm not going to go through this in detail, but again, you can see in that first one, social structure are unified, vision for the future is brightening, maximum community in terms of social priority. The supply of social order, in other words, how cohesive is the society and how much the institutions in the society actually deliver on that social cohesion. Well, the supply of it is rising and the demand is very high. I'm going to jump to the third, the unraveling. At this point, the social structure is much more diversified. The social priority is really maximized individualism. The vision of the future, it's starting to get a little bit, starting to darken a little bit. The supply of social order in this third turning, it's beginning to fall, or it is falling, and the demand for social order is at its lowest. You jump to the fourth, the crisis phase. The social structures are gravitating. The worldview has now gone from simple, which it was in the first, to now it's simplifying after it had gone through a phase of becoming very complex. In the third turning, the social priority is rising community. It's not there yet. And the vision of the future, it's people are getting a little bit concerned, and there's an urgent sense of how the future is going to turn out. In this fourth phase, this fourth turning, the supply of social order is very low. Society is not providing a lot of evident social cohesion, but the demand for social order is beginning to rise again. So that the social moods swing back and forth between an individualistic focus and a communitarian focus during each seculum. And that's one of the key points to remember, is it's this back and forth swinging between, do we emphasize the common good, the communitarian values, or is our individual values valued, our values emphasized? And and the book basically talks about this swinging back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, each 100-year cycle. So let's get into what some of the key points of the book are. And again, the first two of them were describing the seculum cycle and describing the fourth turning, which I just did. I won't review that. He gets into it also gets into the generational archetypes and their roles. And he says each generation plays a distinct role in the crisis based on their life stages. So there's these archetypes are repeating the generations. Each one goes through what it delivers, and then it cycles back eventually. And so what are these four archetypes? Well, there are the baby boomers. He calls them the prophets. These are the visionaries who set the stage for the change that is emerging. The nomad, those were the baby boomers. That's my generation. There's the nomads, which are generally the Gen Xers. They're the pragmatic leaders who manage the chaos that's going on during the crisis. There's the heroes, as he defines them, and these are the millennials. This is ultimately the generation that ultimately sacrifices to do the rebuilding. And the final one, the artists, or the Gen Zs, those who grow up in the aftermath and help stabilize the new order. Another key point is the predictable nature of societal change. Basically posits that by understanding the cyclical patterns, we can anticipate social moods and behaviors, and this awareness can help in policymaking, personal decisions, and preparing for future shifts. Another key point is, and this is, as the book title says, we are now in the fourth turning. This is what Howe argues, that we are currently in the fourth turning, facing significant crisis that will redefine society. Events like pandemics, economic instability, and political polarization are seen as symptoms of this transformative phase. So all of this stuff we see on the news every day, this is not new. These are things that have happened repeatedly throughout history. The book suggests we will likely see profound shifts in governance, economic systems, and social structures, and also possible conflicts could include geopolitical wars, civil unrest, or financial collapse. Other key point is hope and revival. In the book, he talks about, despite the turmoil, the fourth turning ends with an emergence of a new societal high. Now, I want to stop here and say he does not necessarily say that the new high will be wonderful and utopian. He just says it'll be new and it'll reflect the changes that the new emerging view of society, as defined by these cycles, will emerge. So he doesn't get into this thing about, once this crisis is over, we're going to go into a new utopia. He doesn't do that. The millennials and younger generations will play a key role in rebuilding institutions for the next society. And kind of what I gathered from that, if you want to get a deep understanding of what the institutional structures of the 20 years from now, or even 10 or 15 years from now, look at the millennials, look at the Gen Zers, and see what they reflect in their values, and those values will be reflected in the next cycle of new institutions. So now I want to get into some of the similarities between the fourth turning and spiral dynamics. They both take a cyclical and developmental perspective. The fourth turning, in the fourth turning, they talk about societies moving through recurring cycles consisting of 4 turnings, ultimately leading to a new social order, a social order. Spiral dynamics says societies and individuals evolve through a series of psychological and cultural stages, progressing from one level to the next in response to changing life conditions. So again, there's this tying back between the individuals and the societies and how they respond to the environment and what's going on in the society. So that they both kind of, in a sense, have this life condition, evolution of life condition emphasis. So the similarities, both theories suggest that societies and cultures move through predictable stages over time, with each stage shaped by past developments and emerging crises. Both theories suggest an oscillation between individualistic focus and collectivist focus. And crisis is a catalyst for transformation. In the fourth turning, they talk about the fourth turning is a crisis period that destroys outdated institution and paves the way for a new civic order. And spiral dynamics talks about this in the same way, is that when a worldview or a V-meme no longer addresses emerging challenges, a crisis forces individuals and societies to transition to a higher order level. So both theories emphasize that crises are necessary for transformation, acting as breaking points that lead to a higher level of social organization. They both have generational archetypes versus V-memes. In the fourth turning, each generation plays a specific role: the prophet, the nomad, the hero, the artist, in shaping the response to the crisis. And in spiral dynamics, they talk about different value systems. Blue brings order and tradition, orange, achievement and capitalism, green, egalitarianism, influence how individuals and societies respond to the change. Again, somebody that comes at what's going on today in the world from a blue orientation, they're gonna view things very differently than somebody who's looking at it through a green egalitarian perspective. So the similarities, both models assign different roles or perspectives to groups of people, shaping how they engage with societal change. They also both talk about both models talk about the predictability of social change. In the fourth turning, this historical patterns repeat in roughly 80 to 100-year cycles, driven by generational shifts. And again, the emphasis of this is that each generation, as it comes of age, exerts its influence on the society, and those are the things that bring about the change. In spiral dynamics, they talk about societies evolve in a structured way through different value systems, either progressing or regressing based on their ability to handle complexity. So in other words, both models suggest that social change follows a structured, somewhat predictable pattern rather than occurring randomly. Both models really talk about that they have implications for the future and how we can view the future. The current crisis, the fourth turning, which roughly goes from 2008 to early 2030s, will lead to major societal and institutional reset, after which a new era of stability will emerge. Again, I want to emphasize that new stability, putting it in American political terms, it could be right-leaning, it could be left-leaning. He doesn't really get into predicting about that. He just says that it will bring about a new era of stability. In spiral dynamics, humanity is transitioning from the individualistic, material-driven orange stage and collectivist green stage towards a more integrated, systems-based approach, which would be yellow turquoise. So both models predict an eventual shift to a more balanced or integrated system after the current crisis resolves. Now, real quickly, here's some of the key differences between the two. In terms of its focus, the fourth turning focuses on historical cycles and generational shifts, while spiral dynamics focuses on psychological and cultural evolution. In terms of the cycle length, again, the fourth turning model, it's dealing with 80 to 100 year per full cycle. And in spiral dynamics, there is no fixed timeline. Evolution depends on the conditions and the responses to those conditions. In terms of crisis rule, fourth turning talks about those roles are forced by generational realignment. And in spiral dynamics, it's defined, the roles are pushing individuals and societies to a new value system. And again, in terms of progression, fourth turning is a circular or a historical repeat in the cycles, while spiral dynamics views the progression as upward towards higher complexity, though regression is possible. Now, this is where I cheated a little bit, because I did want to explore just one thing that I noticed, and it was I got, as I read through, particularly the fourth turning is here. He lays it out in very specific patterns from the first to the second to the third to the fourth turning, and all the book lays it out in those patterns. In other words, from the post-crisis period on through to the crisis period. And spiral dynamics, in one sense, although it does follow a similar pattern, the key thing in spiral dynamics, if you want to talk about what happens, you're really looking at what happens before the change that takes place when a new V-meme emerges. In other words, it starts with the crisis. It doesn't start at post-crisis, it starts with crisis. And I was as I mentally was bouncing back and forth between the two, it's like, man, how do I pull this together? So I cheated. I spent quite a lot of time on ChatGPT and Copilot and asked a bunch of questions. And it was helpful. And so what I did, I started out with saying, okay, talk about starting with the War of the Roses, which I'll get to a little bit later, which was roughly 600-700 years ago almost. That was the crisis. And so I said, okay, I want to compare the fourth turning and spiral dynamics moving forward from the War of the Roses to today. And what it came up with was fairly interesting. And this was a chart that's actually in the book, and this is why I chose the War of the Roses, because he goes all the way from our current saeculum, which is at the bottom, goes all the way back to the Arthurian generation. In the first book, Howe just went back through American history, starting with the crisis of the Revolutionary War. And in this book, he goes all the way back through basically to the Elizabethan era. Well, even prior to the Elizabethan era, and looks at Anglo-American history. So this is what I wanted to do, was weave the patterns of the fourth turning and spiral dynamics, looking at it from the perspective of this entire 6.5 roughly saeculum progression of time. Okay, so in this, so the fourth turning saeculum are punctuated by crisis, as are spiral dynamics V-memes. The saeculum cycle starts with a high and ends with a crisis. I wanted to look at how saeculums unfold, starting with a crisis. So again, I asked Copilot and somewhat ChatGPT this was the question I asked: reflect on how the four generation cycle in the fourth turning unfolded, starting from the War of the Roses, using insights from spiral dynamics. And Copilot didn't unfold the cycles in exactly the same way that Howe did in the fourth turning. Again, it's how it's presented. So if it looks a little bit off, but I ultimately thought it gave some real interesting insights, and it did do a good job of pointing the connections between the two models. Again, they're not the same. They're looking at things in different ways, but there are connections. And then this is what it actually gave me. So again, starting in that late medieval saeculum, it even named the saeculums differently. In other words, the 1450s to the 1550s, that War of the Roses era. Again, the War of the Roses crisis, 1455 to 1487. The fourth turning crisis, this was a series of civil wars for the throne of England between the houses of Lancaster and York. The generational archetype during that period was the heroic civic, and the role was emerging during crisis. This generation works to restore order. And from a spiral dynamics perspective, this reflected a shift from red to blue, from feudal anarchy to centralized monarchy, transition from power-driven red or warring warlords, warring nobles, excuse me, to a blue establishment of a strong centralized authority under the Tudors. In this, the hero generation, shaped by the strifes of the wars, supports the growth of the blue values, embracing order, loyalty, and a unified national identity under a monarch. And again, just want to emphasize that these are the words that Copilot shows. So I'm not taking any credit for. I personally, I think it's a really good analysis, but I'm not taking any credit for it, or a little credit for it. The next one, the Reformation saeculum, which roughly went from the 1550s to the 1640s. The first turning, the high, this is the Elizabethan era, a time of relative peace, cultural flourishing, and strong national institutions. The generational archetype was the artist, and its role was to nurture in a stable society. They appreciate structure and collaborate within established systems. And from a spiral dynamics perspective, this really emphasizes a blue order beginning to really solidify itself, with a strong emphasis on order and duty. The Church of England's prominence reinforces blue values of purpose and obedience. Also during this period, the second turning, there was an awakening. That this was a period of the English Reformation and early Puritans, and they questioning religious doctrines and advocating for pure forms of worship. the generational archetype during this period was the prophet or the idealist, and their role was to challenge existing ideologies and seeking spiritual renewal. So again, during this Reformation cyclum, you have both represent the high of that solidifying the blue, but also beginning with the awakening, the questioning of that coming out of that awakening generation. And from a spiral dynamics standpoint, we're looking at a shift from blue to really very early orange. In other words, individual interpretation, the push for personal engagement with scripture, hints at blue autonomy and rationality. Prophets ignite shifts by questioning blue structures, paving the way for orange values of individual empowerment and logical reasoning. The next cyclum, the revolutionary cyclum, 1640s to 1730s. Again, this is from an Anglo-American, not strictly an American perspective. This cyclum was really characterized by the third turning of the unraveling of the English Civil War, which was a division between the royalists and the parliamentarians. The generational archetype, the nomad, were very reactive. Their role was hardened by chaos, and because of that, they became very pragmatic and very independent. And in spiral dynamics perspective, this did represent a clash of blue and red, the authority versus power struggles. The blue desire for order really confronted red assertiveness and rebellion. During the fourth turning of that cyclum, which they call the Glorious Revolution, this is a time where the constitutional monarchy was established, and its generational archetype was the hero or the civic. And again, they rebuilt and reinvented national governance during this period. And from a spiral dynamics standpoint, this was a shift from blue to orange. Again, reflecting the very, very early birth of modern democracy, embracing constitutional law and citizens' rights, reflects orange rationality and progress. And again, the hero generation redefines institutions with orange principles, emphasizing reason, individual rights, and the rule of law. The fourth turning, or the fourth cyclum, the Enlightenment period, 1730s to 1820s. The first turning, or the high, was the Georgian stability, economic growth, and imperial expansion. Generational archetype was the artist or adaptive. They played a supportive role that they supported and benefit for the strong institutions. And again, from a spiral dynamics perspective, this really represented an expansion and a maturing and strengthening orange V-meme. Scientific and industrial advances, orange values dominate, focusing on progress and innovation. During the second turning of this cyclum, during that period, both American and French revolutions occurred. The generational archetype, the prophet or the idealist, and their role was to advocate for liberty, equality, and fraternity, or life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, I guess, depending on which perspective you're looking at from. Again, from a spiral dynamics standpoint, this represented a shift from orange to the green beginning, shall we say, starting with the emphasis in human rights and democracy. And these really represented very early stirrings of the green V-memes, emphasizing quality and community. The prophets fuel revolution that challenge existing orange systems, planting seeds for green ideals of social justice. The five, the industrial cyclical, which runs from the 1820s to the 1900s. This third turning, or the unraveling, represent the Victorian era contradictions, industrial wealth amid social inequality. Again, the generational archetype was the nomad or reactive. And the role it played was disillusioned. And they seek tangible results and self-reliance. And again, from a spiral dynamics perspective, this really represented tension between orange and emerging green, characterized by the class struggle, workers demand rights, reflecting nascent green concerns within an orange industrialist and orange capitalist framework. And then the fourth turning crisis, what came out of this was both World Wars I and II. The generational archetype was the hero. And its role, unite to face existential threats, rebuilding post-war societies. And again, this reflected, from a spiral dynamics perspective, this reflected a full-blown emergence of green. In other words, collective efforts and welfare states, emphasis on community welfare and international cooperation. The hero's generations experiences foster widespread adoption of green values, leading to social reforms and global alliances. And the final one, the one roughly that we're in now, the millennial perspective. The millennial seculum, the first turning was the high, post-World War II prosperity. Generational archetype was the artist. Its role was to support the rebuilding effort and value conformity and cooperation. Again, green now, from a spiral dynamics perspective, green is continuing to strengthen. Civil rights and counterculture movements for equality, and now environmentalism is beginning to grow. The second turning, the awakening, this is talk about the cultural revolution that occurred in the 60s and 70s. The generational archetype, the prophet or idealist, their role was to challenge materialism, advocate for peace and love. And again, from a spiral dynamics perspective, green flourishes, questioning green materialism, focus on human potential and community. And continuing with that, millennial seculum. In its third turning, the unraveling period, 1980s to 2000s, fragmentation. Generational archetype is the nomad. The role is skeptical of institutions and value pragmatism. And this, from a spiral dynamics perspective, this is reflecting green versus orange tensions, economic disparities and identity politics, and reflect struggles between individual success and communal values. The fourth turning crisis, the current era, climate change, pandemics, social and political upheaval, the generational archetype, the hero, the role of millennials will be stepping in up to address global crisis. I'm sure there can be a lot of arguments about that, but just from a very practical standpoint, those crises will be faced by the people who were alive at the time, and that's, we're talking about the millennials and the Gen Zs. And again, from a spiral dynamics perspective, this reflects a movement towards yellow and turquoise, systemic solutions and global consciousness, embracing integrative thinking to solve complex problems. The millennials, as the hero generations, are spearheading a shift towards yellow systemic awareness, laying the groundwork for turquoise holistic integration. Okay. Oh, that's the presentation. So here's this, I'm just going to throw out some questions that we can, again, feel free to not even address these, but just ask questions. But here's some questions that came up in my mind that I thought might be interesting to discuss. And I'm just going to throw them all out at the same time and not say we need to address them at all, or certainly not in this order. So the first question is from a spiral dynamics perspective. The four turnings 100-year cycles model does seem to hold up going back to the 15th century or 700 years. What about going back 1,000 years, 5,000 years, 10,000 years? Does that same 100-year cycle repeating itself hold true 10,000? Would that have held true 10,000 years ago? The fourth turning is here, built a case for its validity using primarily Anglo-American or Western history. How valid do you think the model is from the perspective of Asian and Southern hemispheric history? And then just what are your thoughts and feelings about the relationship between the fourth turning model and the spiral dynamics model? Stop sharing. I see Gail and Barbara and Jonathan are right there. Gail, you're first. Barbara, you're next. Jonathan, you're after that. Take it away, Gail.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I didn't know this model at all, so it's very new for me. So thank you. I wondered a few things. It was written artists, prophets, and all this, and there were 5 of them, and then
there were 4 generations.
So there was the retired artist or something like that, or the hidden artist, and then there was again the artist after the hero. So there was 5, and then there was 4. So that's why I didn't understand what was happening. So you think there were 4?
Yeah, there are. Okay. Each cyclium or each 80 to 100-year cycle reflects 4 generations.
Yeah, but because the first time you show the generations, it was 5, so that's why I was confused. That's fine. And also, I think from Ken Wilber perspective, the human rights was orange. So I don't know if it was the early stages of green or if it was orange, but it looks like green, but I don't know why Ken Wilber said it was orange, and all the enlightenment also. So yeah, I don't know which one is true.
Well, I guess my one comment on that is, though when I was reflecting there was, what did Copilot think about it? What did AI think about it? And I wouldn't necessarily trust that AI has a shall we say, a spiral wizard level understanding of spiral dynamics, or even of how spiral dynamics has unfolded through history. So I think you're right, and you did recognize some of those discussion points about where, when we get into discussions, is this orange, is this green, is this light blue, whatever. I think you're valid in that. Again,
what's your opinion? Do you think it's early green, or do you think it's orange?
I think that it's a hotly debated issue amongst a lot of people who have a lot of understanding.
Okay. Okay. And the last thing, yeah, the last part, it was running from the 1900 to now, or to 2000. Yeah, to now actually, and
Mhm.
it's way more than 100 years. So normally it was supposed to be 80 to 100 years, but now we are at um 125, I guess, years. And so the numbers don't match.
I don't
Our,
mean, I don't
we
mean
may
to flip.
be
Yeah,
we
I
may be
get
in
it.
the next turn, the first turning point. The fourth may be behind us. I don't know.
I think what was going on there again is you're looking at two different, because again, the question that I asked was essentially compare spiral dynamics model with the fourth turning model. Um, they're, they're, they're similar models, but they're also very different.
Mm.
And when you're, and remember, when you're talking about time frame, the fourth turning model very precisely in a way it was laid out by Howe in the book, it's laid out in very precise 4-generation, 80 to 100-year cycles. Spiral dynamics doesn't do that. I mean, we've got some V-memes that have been around for 100,000 years. And I think if I had to write it up, then I'm not making excuse for Copilot. It's a very powerful tool, but I think we probably broke its brain to ask it to make those kind of comparisons.
Mm.
But I think it may, at least if you're looking at it when I looked at it in general terms, not saying, well, these two have to fit precisely. It's somewhat, if you look, it's like, are you looking at spiral dynamics through the lens of the fourth turning? Or are you looking at the fourth turning through the lens of spiral dynamics? I mean, you can, and it sounds like
Yeah.
what you're saying, but they are different.
I think it can still work if we consider that we're in the first part of the four phases now from 2000, and it can correspond to turquoise,
Could,
not necessarily both yellow and turquoise. Maybe it would be a way to link the two.
yeah, I bet. Save
No,
that
what
for
do
another
you
time.
think?
Again, I have not, I don't have an answer for you. I mean,
Okay, that's fine. That's
yeah,
fair enough.
no, I mean,
Okay. Okay, but it's a good question, I think, because it may shift the way we look at things. If we are in the fourth part, it means that we are in the chaos thing, and we are in the death cycle. But then if we are in the first phases, so it means that we're in the spring renewal. So
well, yeah, and you ask a really valid question. I mean, I didn't mean to didn't mean to just push you off, but I mean, to me, the key thing that I've thought about while I was reading this, and Howe does get it the way he describes this. He does. I mean, he lays out a very strong factual presentation that if you go back 700 years, you can see these cycles repeating over and over and over and over again. But he does not say, a new communitarian worldview is going to emerge and we're going to have a wonderful communitarian based world. In other words, from a spiral dynamic standpoint, we're going to emerge from this crisis and a new integrative yellow turquoise driven. He didn't say that. He just says
Yeah.
these crises come apart because you have conflicts in world. He doesn't use the word worldview, but you have these conflicts between how the world views things. In other words, the life conditions that are coming out of that, and that creates the crisis. And he said what the crisis is that issue is settled
Yeah.
either
But so
by a war or by a depression or some huge societal upheaval. And out of that, a new order. In other words, and I'm not saying this is going to happen, a war between the Democrats and the Republicans is going to happen, and a winner will emerge, and that new order will emerge out of that conflict. Doesn't say which one's going to win. It just says that that's what's going to happen.
but
And
so in the book, he didn't write the book in 2025. So when did his for his last 4 phases
well, okay,
cycle ended?
the fourth turning, according to the book, in the current cyclical started in 2008, and he's predicting it's going to go roughly through either very, very late 2020s to early 2030s. And I want to give Barbara and Jonathan and Jackson and
Yeah.
a chance up, but really great questions, Gail. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the presentation and thank you for your answers.
Quick answer to Gail's first question. The reason there's 5 there, Gail, if you think about in 1700, how long people live, very few people over 80 were alive. And now we have people running the U.S. government that are over 80, and they're a recycling of that artist generation from 100 years ago, literally. So that's what he's showing there, that we've got some very elderly. I mean, I'm baby boom, and I'm a kid compared to these people. So that's the 5th. It's a recycle. Like you, Gail, I think that what wasn't Chad, it was the other one, right? Was too far ahead in its spiral matches. I think I'm 1,000%, having gone through the 50s and 60s. I'm 1,000%. That was orange. Individual rights. The Black women I knew who were becoming engineers and stuff. It wasn't communitarian. It was, I have the right to make a living as I see fit and that sort of thing. And yes, we did it together, but it was about our individual freedom to do things, which felt like a renaissance in orange, right? A better way to do it. One of the things that really hit me when I did the reading of his newest book is life conditions. So one of the things that really struck me is he talks about these 4 generations being different because of what life was like when they were children. So if you think about, since I know this whole set, I'm going to start with my parents' generation, who are the old geezers that are in Washington now. And a lot of them were children of the Depression, right? So that childhood trauma from the Depression was always there. And then if you go to my dad's generation, they were the hero generation that fought World War II. Whether it was a woman, Rosie the Riveter, making tanks for the boys, or whether it was, folks slogging through the jungles on Asian islands. That was the hero generation. And so they very different life experiences, right? The Depression folks were kind of beat down, whereas the ones that survived World War II all came back on a real high. they had won, they had made the world safe for democracy. I mean, as a kid, I can remember people saying that over and over again, you know,
Yeah.
and it was a very we. Um, so, so again, so my childhood was very different than my dad's childhood, right? Where they literally worried about eating some days. They couldn't afford to heat the house, you know, those kinds of things. I never had that. And so, you know, and then the next generation, uh, you know, we hear them talked about nomads because a whole lot of folks that are a generation younger complained that their spoiled brat baby boomer parents treated them like cast-offs, you know, just uh, didn't take care of them the way children should be taken care of. And I'll have to say, a lot of my, Paul, you probably said the same thing. A lot of our colleagues and uh, compatriots, we'd say the same thing about them. They just didn't take care of their children the way children should be taken care of. A lot of latchkey kids, a lot of parents that were just too busy with their own lives. And so, you know, each of those then, when you grow up in those situations, you end up having a different view of life, right? And so those life conditions go with you your whole life. And the millennials were more taken care of. So
Barb,
you're back again to that.
you're coming up on 5 minutes, so.
Yep, I know. So I think that life conditions thing, if you read about the difference in life conditions, you know, I'll have to say he makes a 1,000% case for Graves just being right. Life conditions are absolutely critical on developing people.
Thanks,
Okay,
Barb.
thank you.
Jonathan, go ahead.
Thank you, Paul, for bringing this theory to my attention. I wouldn't have really necessarily looked into it or learned much about it if you hadn't done your presentation. So thank you. And what I was wondering is whether spiral dynamics and this fourth turning are talking about two different dimensions of growth. So one of the things that Cook-Reuter talked about, drawing from Wilbur, is that there's vertical growth and there's horizontal growth. Vertical growth means really changing the entire container of one's abilities, really, so that one's capacities actually increase. Whereas horizontal growth doesn't necessarily mean so much of changing capacities, but it means a growing in skills within that capacity. And you can become much more knowledgeable within your capacity, but your basic level of capacity is still the same. So these fourth turnings sounded to me like they were talking about more about horizontal growth, or horizontal changes, whether they're growth or not. Whereas spiral dynamics seems to be talking more about vertical growth. I was wondering if you wanted to reply to that observation.
You know, I had not thought about it that way, but I think you're probably onto something there. And again, I'm just pulling this out of the air at this point. There does seem to be, it does feel like the fourth, there's nothing really incredibly revolutionary, I'll choose that word, about a saeculum. In other words, if there isn't a set of life conditions that really call for huge change, like, you know, it would be interesting to see the same thing, look at it from the standpoint of what happened when the Roman Empire fell. You know, when an entire civilization changes.
Yeah.
So, and in many respects, those are the kind of things that spiral dynamics looks at. What are those huge issues that bring about these changes in consciousness and views of the world? And the fourth turning is, you're right, it's really looking about perfecting the issues that are at play. And it just so happens, again, by going back and looking at it from the perspective of the last 700 years, I mean, even spiral dynamics, you know, there's, you know, blue was around for 5, 6, 7, almost 10,000 years. And then all of a sudden, you know, along comes the Black Plague, And then what comes out of that? Well, orange, green, yellow, turquoise. I mean, you got four different worldviews emerged during a period of less than 1,000 years, 800 years.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a speeding up that's reflected. So it's not, it didn't seem unusual to me to see, I mean, because again, if you look at what it said in there, they covered red through turquoise in the descriptors. And that didn't seem unusual to me, but it did beg the question to me is, if you were to ask that same question, does the same pattern hold? Does this 4-generational cycle hold? If you went back 10,000 years, would it hold? Probably not.
Yeah.
Probably not. It would, what that means and what that reflects is a deepening of an understanding of the worldview, the dominant worldview that's at play. And you're,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, one more point before my time's up,
Yeah.
which is, so I was looking into the evidence for Neil Howe's theory. His name is Neil Howe?
Neil Howe.
Yeah. So at first, when I came to spiral dynamics, I was honestly skeptical because it's just one person's theory. It's a meta theory. It wasn't proven, and it seemed like it was, and his work was still first draft stage. It hadn't been peer reviewed and any of that. But I started to develop more confidence in the validity of the general idea of spiral dynamics as I saw that it correlates with many other developmental stage theories, which do have a lot of evidence, like rigorous evidence to back them up. So I think that's what bought my confidence gave me confidence in the system of the spiral as being at something true. But Neil Howe's theory, like, if it's true, if he's getting at something true, then you would expect other researchers and other theorists to have come up with similar ideas. Are there? I think that would be kind of a critical point that I would be looking for to see if there's validity to it, because otherwise it's just his and his partner, he and somebody Strauss or something that co-authored that book. It's just their analysis, and like that's great. Maybe they're geniuses and maybe they got it right, but it's very hard for someone who's not going to review all of their material and see whether from the lens of my own thinking that material does seem to point in the direction of their theory or not. Unless I'm going to do that, then I would just be basically resting on their authority for the validity of their theory. So I think that one of the surest signs of something really getting at something true is that lots of people have converged on the same idea, which is what we get with the spiral. So I'm wondering whether you're aware of anything similar to that when it comes to the 4 turnings.
I'm not aware of that, but I am aware of that there is criticism out there. I mean, even as I was going
Hey,
through.
Paul, just real quick, Howe actually has in one of his books, and I don't remember which one, a list of other cycle theories, Jonathan.
Oh, okay.
So he goes through, there's all sorts of cycle theories from economic to social to political, right? And he actually compares them.
Oh,
And I
okay,
don't
good.
think it was in the last one. I think it was one of the earlier books, Jonathan.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Barbara. I was not aware of that, but I have read that. I know that there's a lot of there are critics of it, and even as I was reading through it, it's like, well, I don't know if I fully, he would give an example out of history. These things happened, and this reflects that this is how this generation's defined, and it's like, I know enough about history to not say it. I think the added challenge, and correct me if you think I'm wrong, one of the benefits that I think of spiral dynamics is that it, again, and it's to me, it's both, it's some of one of the paradox of it. Spiral dynamics is talking about the evolution of societies, but it also recognizes that there are individuals in those societies. And so there are similarities between, for instance, Cook-Reuter and Graves. I mean, you can see the similarity. I mean, you've done presentations, so there are similarities. In some ways, I think because because Howe's work really, I mean, it's like, it really does not, other than in very, very, very broad terms, it doesn't, the closest it comes is saying there is a generation of individuals. That's the most refined view that it gives. Well, and to me, that's one of the weaknesses of it. There's no such thing as a quintessential millennial, just as there's no such thing as a quintessential baby boomer. I mean, each generation is embedded in a variety of worldviews, and it would be very difficult, I think, to get.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So the question is like, spiral dynamics is really clear because you could say that the general culture of the entire culture is just the sum average of the specific stage of the spiral that all of the individuals, the power holders in that culture, with weighted averages depending upon the weight of their power in the society, that defines the culture's stage. You could say such a thing. So it's sort of logical in that way that the collective is made up of the individuals. But if you try to do one of these other theories where you sort of lift the collective from and create say that it doesn't depend upon the specific thinking of all the individuals, it becomes a lot more vague, I think, and much more skeptical.
Yeah, and thus incredibly difficult to research.
Yeah,
Yeah,
for sure. Yeah, anyway.
good questions. Thank you, Jonathan. Jackson, you're up next.
Yeah, that was nice. When you were giving the presentation, I wasn't so much thinking about comparing and contrasting them. I was thinking of how the four turning idea is the cyclical adaptation of our species, and that the spiral dynamics theory is the bigger picture. So sort of the four turning is happening as our noosphere, or the neurological mapping in our brain, evolves, generation to generation. I was trying to find it, but I thought I'd heard somebody in a podcast once reference some studies on reindeer, where every 4 generations they change in slightly change in size and height and stuff to as a cyclical adaptation to their environment physically. So we're just doing that same cyclical adaptation, but in how our brain is evolving.
Right. And it's, I think the other thing, and I probably didn't get at this well enough in my presentation. Well, I mentioned it, but the core of what the fourth turning said to me, was it reflects the eternal back and forth sway between, are you oriented individually or are you oriented communally? In other words, do your values say, my right is to do whatever the fuck I want to do, or we need to work together, we need to cooperate, we need to make sure that everybody's heard. And those are two valid and real perspectives. And what the fourth turning does is it just talks about this is constant at a societal level, at a generational level. This swings back and forth, back and forth, back and forth.
Yeah, I now think that back and forth oscillation is between the brain hemispheres, the left and the right brain.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. I was going to say that. You beat me to it, but yeah. I mean, it's so, to get back to what Jonathan asked earlier, are there studies that reinforce the validity of the theory? Not exactly, but there's some tangentially supported in other ways. Good question, Jackson. Thank you. Josh, you're up next.
Sure, I just want to give an opportunity to see if anyone wants to jump ahead of me who hasn't spoken yet. So I will hold that space.
Johannes?
Yes, thanks so much. I wanted to actually respond to John's question, whether this has been validated or whether There's some consensus forming around it. I have to say, in my perception, the fourth turning is a much more accepted framework in popular mainstream than spiral dynamics is. Mostly because the critics to spiral dynamics is, and it's hard to scientifically verify, and all the original data is gone, and all that critic, we know all of that. But the fourth turning, if you read the book, it's actually playing out right now, and anyone can trace that and can trace the argument that they made. And the fascinating thing is that they made this argument in the 90s. And they predicted in the 90s, that was the first book, the original one, they predicted in the 90s that around 2005, a new fourth turning will emerge, likely initiated by some sort of economic upheaval or crisis, and that it will be characterized by polarization, populism, maybe something like a pandemic, maybe a civil war or a kinetic international war. And more or less all of these things have played out since it got triggered by the financial crisis in 2008. So by now, if you trace the steps, everything is there. And it's not like the fourth turning caused the COVID pandemic. It's that pandemic happened before, but it's this generation that is in charge right now that made a mess of the pandemic that we got. And what I can see is that in certain circles, like for example, in the financial management circles, Wall Street, financial advisors who look at macro perspectives, like macro developments of economies, they use the fourth turning heavily as a framework. When you are like on LinkedIn or on Twitter, in those circles, the fourth turning will repeatedly come up because they use this framework as a macro reference of the time we're being in right now and how things are playing out. Because long-term financial investments are driven by these long-term macro cycles, the debt cycle, interest rate cycles, and all of that. And they can see that the fourth turning has something to say about that, like the rising volatility, the political unrest, the geopolitical tensions, all of that feeds into long-term macro financial decisions. And the entire financial sphere at least is aware of the fourth turning. Maybe not everyone is fully believing it or using it, but many of them are. And that is a much more prevalent use, I would say, than I see of spiral dynamics, which is still more like a spiritual sociological niche. Not less valid. It's just like how it's accepted by mainstream. I also see the fourth turning being quoted more and more in regular or referenced in regular articles from an Atlantic or Financial Times. So that's just to that question. For me, it's next to spiral dynamics, I think the most important framework that I found to understand the current times we are in, to understand what is happening in the US and in Europe. It's a Western view, of course, and to also take some comfort in it, that this is all not really new. It happened before. It's a cycle. And that after this very turbulent whitewater period that we're finding ourselves in right now, by somewhere in the 30s, late 30s, that we will reach the next turning, the new first turning, which is new awakening and a new positive atmosphere in which our kids, my kids, will grow up. That makes me hopeful about all of this. Yeah, that's just what I wanted to add.
Thank you. That was really helpful.
I think you're absolutely right, Johannes. And that is the most compelling part of the book, to actually see. He did a good job of laying out, this is what happened in history. Here's how it unfolded. It's pretty hard to argue with history in some respects. Now, the criticisms come out of, well, yeah, maybe that's one way you could interpret that period in history, but there would be other ways. But I think generally speaking, you're absolutely right. And there's no doubt about the fact that it's being quoted way more than spiral dynamics is. It's very much part of the current way we talk about things. Again, thanks. Good observations. Josh, you can go.
Okay, do we want to turn off the recording?
Oh, we could, yeah. I'll do that.